I'd like to call to order the March 3rd, 2021 public hearing for the City of Tampa's Architectural Review Commission. Welcome, everyone. My name is Zachary Greco, Chair of the Commission. If you are here to present a project, you will have limited time to make your presentation, so we suggest being thorough but concise. When coming to the microphone, you will need to identify yourself and your relationship to the project. The commissioners will not ask any questions during your presentation. Your project should be presented in the following order: site plans, elevations, architectural details, and wall sections. Staff will then present the staff report, and we will then ask for public comment. Following your presentation, the commissioners will be asking questions in the same order as the presentation. Please state and spell your name clearly if you are here to speak for or against a project. Your time will be limited to 3 minutes, so take some time now to summarize your comments because 3 minutes go by very quickly. Following public comment, the applicant will be allowed 5 minutes for a rebuttal. The public hearing will then be closed. The only comments which will be allowed after the public hearing is closed will be in response to any questions from the commissioners. The commissioners will then ask and discuss the case and will make their decision based upon the City Ordinance Chapter 27 of the City Zoning Code, the design guidelines, the Secretary of the Interior standards, the Historic Preservation Development Review comments, HPDRC, and the testimony given at this public hearing. The ARC can only act on items that are within our specific jurisdictional responsibility. Owner and agents are independently responsible to obtain any appropriate permits and or approvals. If you haven't already done so, please silence all cell phones. At this point, I'll ask my fellow commissioners, starting on my right, to introduce themselves.
Susan Claus-Smith, Architect and Vice Chair.
Good evening. My name is Stephen Sutton. I am a registered architect and I hold the Architectural Historian Chair.
Dan Myers, Architect.
Brent Taylor, Contractor.
I'm Ashley DeKiavis. I'm an attorney.
We're also joined here tonight by city staff, Dennis Fernandez, Ron Vila, Beverly Juisak, and Kamaria Pettis-Mackel.
Good evening. Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. Will the commissioners state whether or not they have a conflict of interest regarding the item that's listed on the agenda?
Not on.
None.
None.
Thank
None.
you. Additionally, will the commissioners please state on the record whether or not they've had any ex parte communications regarding the item that's listed on the agenda?
Not on.
None.
No.
Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Ron Avila, I'm staff with Historic Preservation. Moving down the agenda to continuations, we have none that are indicated on tonight's agenda. And now moving to the swear-in. Everybody that wishes to testify, please stand up and raise your right hand, including staff. At this time, we're ready to move to the first case, which is ARC 20-463. It's for the address of 1314 South DeSoto Avenue. This is in the Hyde Park Historic District. There is a period structure, a contributing structure on the site currently. It dates back to 1923. The underlying zoning classification for this parcel is RM24. There is a two-phase approach for the request tonight. The certificate of appropriateness for new construction for an accessory structure with site improvements is for a certificate of appropriateness. And then there's 3 variances attached. I did speak with the owner yesterday. He's going to go and address his variances first, get into that, see where that lands him. If it is approved, then we'll go into the certificate of appropriateness. With the variances that are requested this evening, it's a rear yard setback from 20 foot to 3 feet with an encroachment for 9 inches for eaves and gutters. There's a corner side yard setback from 7 foot to 3 foot with an encroachment of 9 inches for eaves and gutters, and a height increase from 15 foot to 35 foot. Attached to your packet that you have, the variance hardship criteria is included, so you could follow along. At this time, I'd like to quickly go through the photo presentation. Dennis, can you hit that button, please? Thank you. On the monitors, we have the 1929 Sanborn map. Property in question is highlighted in this green area here. It is on the corner of DeSoto and Hills. You have Howard to the west as a reference point and Deacle to the north. In this multifamily area, you have an array of single-family homes with multifamily construction as well, mostly 1 and 2 story structures. On the property in question, you have a 1-story base with a little pop-up of a 2nd story. In 1929, there was a 1-story accessory structure that's indicated on the Sanborn map. And as you go down the block to the east, these are the single-family homes. This is indicated by multifamily here. And then as you go to the north, you have multifamily, which is also 2 stories. It's anchored by a church on the corner, and then some additional frame construction. This is looking from above. You have Howard Avenue, you have Burns Park, Hills, and then DeSoto. And this is the property in question. This is looking back at the period contributing structure. This is the south elevation. This was cut up into different structures at one time. I think it was up to 3 or 4 units at one time. This is looking at the vehicular access off of Hills. The curb cut is fairly new, and then the accessory structure would be in the rear, which is being presented this evening. This is some more of the period structure, and concluding the 4 elevations of the structure that was altered some time ago. Looking back into the site, this is looking back at a pad where the accessory structure once sat on this parcel. A little closer shot of that location. And just some windows on the primary structure. Series of 3 windows, a ribbon set of windows with the proper mullions and a 1/1 pattern. Surrounding property, this is the abutting contributing structure to the east. And to the north, this is, as I stated, the zoning in this area is multifamily. This is a 2-story volume that's just to the north of the subject site. That concludes the photo presentation at this time. Mr. Blackwood, you could address the board to discuss the variance only. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, give you some background. I'm Jim Blackwood. I'm a retired military officer at the Air Force, Gulf War vet from 1991. It was 30 years ago this week we had the ceasefire. I've been a Hyde Park resident for 23 years. I'm a standing member of the HHPNA for about 10 years or so. I'm extremely motivated and excited about doing this project, starting with the carriage house and then a full restoration and renovation of the primary structure. I got to admit some mild frustration with it as we've gone so far, but I'll get into that. Give you some background. I did a full-blown carriage house, ground-up restoration 10 years ago on the 2105 Marjorie property. I know there's a lot more detail on that, but I just want to at least brief the board here that I'm familiar with the process. I care a lot about the history. I'm not a developer. I'm not in it for profit. I love the history. I love the neighborhood, and I'm passionate about it. I want to do it the right way. I don't know any other way to do it. This is the summary of the variances that I'm asking for. 3 feet, side and rear. Variance from 7 feet on the side, variance of 20 feet from the rear, and a height from 15 to 35 that is proposed. I've read the staff report and I read some of the letters here as well. The variance does, and this is what I'll show in the presentation, align with the historic precedents and the holistic site plan that I'll brief you on. I think it's important to address a little bit of the historic context. I've got 2 slides on this, but one of them is a backup, so I want to be brief on it. But the entire swath of RM24 property that my property sits on, extending from Burns Park all the way to the village, is RM24 zoned. It's a motley compilation of various structures. We've got condos in there, apartments, townhouses, single-family homes, commercial establishments, even an old church. So we've got development from the turn of the last century through the mid-century to the modern, both old and new, all mixed together. In a general sense, the abnormal is the normal. And thus I'm looking for a tailored, unique solution to the problem that I'm outlining here that is in full accordance, though, with the historic guidelines as well as the historic precedents that have been set. Here's the map that shows that swath that I just referenced. That RM24 is in the gray. My property is marked by the star adjacent to Burns Park. I'm going to highlight almost a dozen examples that support the precedent and the application that I filed with the board. Here's the reference property again, outlined here. Ryan addressed that as well. Many of the trees have been removed, all of those legally, all under permit. This is a historic photo that many people probably have not seen. This photo, although the city says is dated 1916, is incorrect. It is in fact a 1923 photo. And in the question answer, I can describe exactly why that is 1923 and not 1916. Outlined in the red is my property, probably within 6 or so months of when it was finished construction. What is notable for the purposes of this presentation is the area that pierces the red area. That is an accessory structure. That is a multi-story accessory structure. And I ask you to take note of the visual appearance of it because that is what is going to form the basis of the application that I have before you in the drawings coming up. The ARC staff report, I read that. It came out with an assessment that the request was not consistent with the Hyde Park design guidelines. I've got a following slide here that walks through those points, point by point, however. I want to note 2 omissions that to bring to your attention. If you just read the staff report, you would not know that by reading that there was a carriage house, a multi-story carriage house located on the same footprint. There are a number of property pictures in there of the main house, but the main house is not the subject of the hearing. The carriage house is. So one of the photos should have been of the concrete pad that showed the historic precedent of the carriage house. The next thing that was omitted was the Hyde Park standard setback of 3 feet side and 3 feet rear is the historic standard, and that's what can be built today without any variances at all. It just so happens that I sit on an RM24 lot, so I have to comply to the multi, which is a 20-foot rear setback and a 7-foot setback. The report also says that it's 1,500 square feet that I'm applying for. That's incorrect. It is 1,225 total square feet. And of significant note, that is much smaller in volume than many of the structures that have already set historic precedent and that have actually been approved recently as well. So we'll get into the next slide, which is the analysis of the application of standards. But what's notable is that the ARC report judged it non-consistent, but never exactly said what it made it non-consistent. It didn't break out any of the 3 variances, the setbacks. It seems to imply that the major grievance is with the height and the volume, but it is not specific in doing so. So we'll talk the standards point by point and then the 10 plus precedent examples. The first point here is it says on pages 69 and 70 that was used as the basis in the report, that the scale and the height and the width, and I've got the operative terms underlined here for emphasis, new buildings compared with other buildings in a block. On the very same block, the historic church is in fact 6 stories tall, and it has parking underneath it behind. Now, one could argue that that is not a carriage house, and I'm talking about a carriage house, but if we're going to be strict to the verbiage as is, it says clearly new buildings and other buildings. It does not distinguish between what is and what is not a carriage house. Next, massing, building, and form. Relationship of building, underlined again, massing and form to other buildings in the district. We could look no further than right next door to see a 2-car carriage house that occupies the same footprint that I'm applying for now. The only difference is a 3rd-story addition that I have, that I've asked for, that is well within the 60-foot building limit. And notably, that's only half of the volume of the floor below. So that's only about 200 square feet we're talking about in total size. The setback, again, the 3-foot side and the 3-foot rear setback is the Hyde Park standard. No variance is required. The standard is not what the code says, 20 feet rear and 7-foot setbacks. And in that entire swath of property that I've showed before, not a single example of a past or present carriage house is set back 7 feet from the rear or 7 feet from the side. The orientation and the site coverage underlined here in relation with other buildings along a block and percentage of the site of the building that covers, percentage of the site the building covers compared to nearby buildings. Looking again directly next door, that occupies a footprint on that property far bigger than my property does or is even envisioned in any of the plans that I've got conceived. Alignment, rhythm, and spacing. The effect of a new building that we'll have. The effect that's going to be on the neighborhood in that area is identical to what was already there in the past, so there is no difference there. I am simply rebuilding a carriage house, multi-story, that was already in the precedent. And I guess I have to call out the Sanborn map of 1929 being inaccurate in relation to a prior 1923 photograph. Concrete is the material, maintaining the materials. Concrete is the material of the main house, and the concrete is also the material of the proposed carriage house, and concrete is a common material in other carriage houses to include the one next door at the blue apartment building. Trim and detail. New construction will be compatible with historic buildings. The apartment building next door is Spanish in nature. The proposed carriage house is also going to be a simplified Spanish structure. It's similar but different. So here I am meeting not only the language but also the intent of the code. The next few, I guess I get a warning on time, will address by elevations and maybe have to save for the question and answer. Existing site plan here. What makes my variance unique is a corner property with an odd notch in the rear. That's what it affects it. Here's a blow up of the survey here. And to put it in context where the previous carriage house stood, it stood only 3 feet. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Okay, so at this point, staff will present the staff report.
As with all requests for variances, the staff is silent. It's a finding of fact. If it meets the criteria, the hardship criteria that was submitted, I think it's important to allow Mr. Blackwood a couple of minutes to read in his hardship that he didn't get a chance to read into that was submitted into the record through a written response, but to put it on the record verbally.
I move to allow the agent owner to add in the variance hardships.
I second that motion.
All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Okay. So if you could you please read the 6 variances, the questions as well as your response, just for the record, please?
And Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office, do you meet the 6 hardship criteria?
Yes.
Okay.
That's correct.
Sorry.
I've got kind of a summary on the slides that I was going to address. Do you want me to read verbatim what I supplied?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Okay, verbatim here, I started off with an introduction here. My primary hardship is an ill-applied, nonsensical code as applied to the historic. What do I mean? First, like the identically RM24 zoned immediate adjacent property, 1308 South DeSoto Avenue, Figure 1, and all other properties in RM24 zoning, Figure 2, section, not a single accessory structure is set back 20 feet from the rear. Repeat, not one accessory structure, historic or new, is set back 20 feet from the rear as per supposed code requirement that I'm seeking variance from here. Second, most of the city allowed accessory structure are well in excess of the supposed code maximum total square footage, as in example 3, figure 3, which is a whopping 1,610 total square feet built in 2002 and set back even less than 3 feet from the rear, figure 4, as per city tax record and photo. Figure 4 is just one example. There are many more examples on just this RM24 zone section alone, like figure 5, a primary structure example, while the vast majority of accessory structures are also far in excess of the supposed 15-foot height limit too. Third, my 1314 DeSoto property was originally designed and built as a single-family home, complete with a multi-story carriage house in the rear, figure 6, as per 1923 historical photo. Most notably, the original carriage house with the 3-foot rear and 3-foot side setbacks, parentheses, identical to what I'm seeking here, close parentheses, is precisely where I intend to build the new carriage house. That means I'm actually having to apply for a variance to rebuild the original carriage house that was built on the very same location with the same setbacks I'm requesting now. I said that before I had the blow up of the survey, so I'll make a minor correction that these setbacks are not exactly the same. They're a little over 2 feet more in the rear and 4 inches on the side. Thus, this indisputable evidence clearly and demonstrably shows that the code is ill-applied. Fourth, an RS 50/60 zoning code for my 2105 Marjorie carriage house that I built 10 years ago allows standard carriage house setbacks of 3 feet rear and 3 feet side without variances. But the RM24 zoning for my 1314 South DeSoto Avenue property, which supposedly requires a 20-foot rear setback and 7-foot side setback, parentheses, which again is not equally applied to any nearby RM24 zoned carriage houses, close parentheses, means the very same carriage house recently built on the Marjorie property, built without any variances at all, is prohibited on the DeSoto lot. Again, if I wanted to, I would have to file for the same 3 variances. So why is a variance required for the DeSoto lot carriage house, exactly where one was built, but not for the Marjorie carriage house when both properties were originally designed and built as single-family homes and restored, preserved as single-family homes in the historic district? That's simply nonsensical. There's no other way to describe that reality. Number 1 here. The alleged hardship or practical difficulties are unique and singular with respect to the property or with respect to a structure or building thereon and are not those suffered in common with other properties and structures or other buildings similarly located. Response. It appears that this case is unique and singular. There does not appear any other historic Hyde Park property with the conditional challenges this property has now. The property is currently zoned RM24, but the home is a historic contributing single-family home built before the zoning for, quote, residential multi, quote, change from the original, quote, residential single, quote. The single-family home will be restored and rebuilt as a single-family home as it was originally designed, along with an accompanying carriage house, which used to be located on the exact same footprint the applicant is proposing here. The challenge is unique because starting circa 1953, and I'm going to reference a Tampa Tribune article that I researched from newspapers.com with an ad advertising an apartment for rent there at that address, the single-family home was carved up into 3 apartments. Thus, for a proper historic restoration of the property to return the home to a single-family home with a carriage house, both should occupy the same footprint as historically depicted starting circa 1912 as originally designed and built. 1912, I add here, is the tax record for the year my house was built, but more than likely that was the year the property was acquired, not when the property was built. However, current RM24 zoning requires a very large 20-foot rear setback and 7-foot side setback for the carriage house accessory structures in excess of 750 square feet total, including living and parking. The current code requirement, if applied, would be unique to this property. The applicant cannot find a single example where such large setbacks have been applied in the historic district for carriage houses in RM24 zoned areas. Since the property will be restored and rebuilt as a single-family home on an RM24 zoned lot, the carriage house should be allowed to be placed where it was originally built. Conditions then and conditions now are identical, 3 feet side and rear. Current residential multi-zoning allows for both the proposed height, below 35 feet, and the proposed square footage, 1,200 square feet more or less, but just not a Hyde Park standard 3-foot rear and side setbacks for carriage houses in excess of 750 square feet, parentheses, which are granted approval for residential single Hyde Park properties as standard procedure. One additional reason that the carriage house needs to be within the current setback is because the fence line and the boundary cuts into the applicant's lot several feet halfway between the road and the rear of the property line, a characteristic that also appears unique to this property. That means the actual rear setback for most of the carriage house will be in excess of 3 feet anyway. Number 2, the hardship or practical difficulty does not result from the actions of the applicant. A self-created hardship or practical difficulty shall not justify a variance. Response: the applicant has not done anything to cause this hardship, practical difficulty. 3, the variance, if granted, will not substantially interfere with or injure the health, safety, or welfare of others whose property would be affected by allowance of the variance. Response: there would be no interference or injury to others at all, substantial or unsubstantial. The proposed carriage house is to be replaced in its original location in the rear corner, interior location of the lot with views facing away from neighboring properties. 4, the variance is in harmony with and serves the general intent and purpose of this chapter in the adopted Tampa Comprehensive Plan. Response: the requested variance is in complete harmony with the chapter and the Tampa Comprehensive Plan, specifically Level 3, high suburban areas of opportunity and multiple land use objectives such as LU Policy 1.2.14, etc. There are many examples of carriage houses in the Hyde Park area that are within the guideline setbacks, and this variance would be in keeping with this precedent. The carriage house is a replacement of a structure originally on the parcel which could have been considered contributing itself and therefore specifically complies with the general intent and purpose of the comprehensive plan and historic preservation. 5, allowing the variance will result in substantial justice being done considering both the public benefits intended to be secured by this chapter and the individual hardships or practical difficulties that will be suffered due to a failure of the board to grant a variance. Response: yes, it will. Allowing the variance will A, provide public benefits via greater property tax values, improved housing, and architectural aesthetics, and B, justly align with established precedents and permissions granted within the historic district. The presumed removal or degradation of the original carriage house was a substantial injustice, altering the historical character of Hyde Park, which the board is tasked with preserving. 6, the variance, if granted, will allow development that is consistent with the design standards and compatible with the historic pattern of development within the historic district, historic conservation overlay district, multiple property designation, or the locally designated landmark or landmark site in which the subject property is located. Response: yes, it will. Standard setbacks for carriage houses, 3-foot rear, 3-foot side for structures far in excess of 1,200 square feet total are regularly allowed in Hyde Park for residential single family and in residential RM areas too. In fact, 1, the property immediately adjacent to the applicant's 1308 DeSoto Ave has a carriage house of 930 square feet, as per the City of Tampa property tax records, which is set back 3 feet from the side and 3 feet, which is set back 3 feet and 3 feet, if even that, not 20 feet and 7 feet. And that property is also zoned RM24. 2, not one carriage house has been found to be set back 20 feet from the rear property in residential multi-historic Hyde Park properties, so the historic consistency for 3-foot implied setback, carriage house setbacks, not 20-foot rear setbacks for carriage houses.
Thank you, Commissioners. As you go into asking questions and public comment, there are 2 letters that are submitted into your packet as well of opposition. I just want to state that for the record. And Mr. Blackwood has copies of these letters as well.
Before we open to any public comment, could I get a commissioner to put the 2 letters that we have into public record?
I move to enter the 2 letters from residents in the Hyde Park Historic District into the record.
I'll second the motion.
And then, all right. And then when we vote, could we just make sure we raise our hands?
Oh.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Against? Thank you. All right, at this point, we will open the public hearing to any public comment who would like to speak either for or against. Please make sure as you come up to say and spell your name. And you do have 3 minutes, just remember.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm Charles Deacon. It's Diaz and Davis.
There it is.
Good evening. My name is George Deacon. It's Diaz and David, E-A-K-I-N. I live 3 houses down from the subject property at 1408 South DeSoto. First, I'd like to commend Mr. Blackwood. I think he's really, we agree wholeheartedly in concept with what he's trying to do. Some of the original plans by others, or plans by others for the subject property, just we're trying to maximize everything out of it. And I really commend Mr. Blackwood for putting a lot of thought and effort into it. I guess just have 2 issues with what's being presented. One is the height of the carriage house. It just seems to be out of scale with what's in the block. The rest of the block is the same zoning except for the church. All the other RM, with 24 is they're 1 and 2 stories. And Jim knows that the church is higher, but it's a different zoning class. It's a higher zoning class. So everything within several blocks is just 1 or 2 stories. And the carriage house would seem to be out of scale with, quote, other things of the same class within the block. And I'm not sure, I've never seen anything that depicts the height of the original carriage house. I know he's talking about the footprint, but I don't know anything that shows the height as being 3 stories. It just seems, it is, to me, it's out of scale with the rest of the neighborhood. The second thing is, I looked at the sketches of the other buildings that he's shown, and I guess it's one site I'd like to see the plan for the whole site and give approval for that rather than doing it piecemeal. I don't know how all the pieces fit together. Normally on any project, if you've got one site, you submit an overall plan. Here's the plan view. Here's where the structures go. I looked at his sketches, I guess, in his emails, but they're not really. there are a couple elevations, but it's hard to tell where the driveways are, where the entrances are. I'm an engineer, and all I could do was count with 2 driveways for 4 units that he's proposing.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else that would like to speak either for or against the project? All right. At this point, we will close this hearing for the public. The commissioners will now ask questions for the applicant. You can wait till it's clean.
I have a couple questions. I would like to
And I
start.
just, Maria Pettis-Malco from the City Attorney's Office. I would just like to remind the commissioners to only ask questions in relation to the variance and the hardship.
That is correct.
Commissioner Sutton, before you ask a question, I have one general question that I'd like to ask. You stated a couple times that the square footage of the building in the application that we have for the staff report is wrong. Has that changed since the original City of Tampa Planning and Development Architectural Review Commission form that you submitted and signed that stated that the approximate gross square footage of the building was 1,516 square feet?
Yeah, if I signed that it was 1,500 square feet, then I made a mistake.
So the actual square footage is what
Uh,
size?
I believe we have 1225.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sutton?
Yes, I'd like to talk about your proposed accessory building on this site for just one moment and its relationship to the past. Am I correct in understanding from your good neighbor notice, as we have in our packet, that you intend to have a one-bedroom apartment as part of this accessory structure?
Yes, I do. It's zoned. It was apparently the property rented out, used as separate dwelling structures. So yes, that would be a separate dwelling structure.
I assume you, sir, have control of this property at this time?
I'm sorry.
I assume you have control of this property at this time?
Control as in ownership?
Yes, sir?
Yes.
Question on the carriage, the historic carriage house that is being replaced. Do you have any documentation on that structure other than what is shown on the aerial photograph that you presented to us? Because
No, I
we
do
certainly
not.
don't have anything in the photo record at this time.
No, I do not. I just have the photo record that shows that.
Do you have any indication as to when that structure was demolished?
No, I do not. I've only got the 1923 photo and the existing concrete pad as evidence.
Thank you for the moment, sir. Question for staff regarding the existing, the formerly existing carriage house. Does staff have any indication as to when that structure may have been demolished in the past? And in the same vein, whether or not that structure was in fact the same structure we see in the aerial photograph?
We have no record of when that structure was either constructed or demoed. Mr. Blackwood had referenced that the picture that he illustrated earlier on was from 23 that shows a multi-level story accessory structure with no date on it. The Sanborn map that I showed on the beginning of my photo essay, we know is from 1923 and shows a one-story accessory structure at that time. So if his dates are accurate, between 23 and 29, that structure was removed, and then they put a very modest one-story accessory structure after it was demolished.
Understood. To the applicant, one more question at this time. I noticed from your site plan there is, if you will, a notch in the northeast corner of your plot. Is there a particular reason for that? Is there an encumbered easement there?
I have no idea what the history of that notch is. I just chalked it up as to the idiosyncrasies in the neighborhood in which we're living in.
I too find it kind of odd because Tampa is relatively notorious for very regular lot geometries, not necessarily sizes, but geometries, and this seems to be an outlier in that respect. Thank you very much for the moment.
It's a notch from my, my property's
Excuse me.
perspective, but the,
Are you,
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Commissioner Sutton, did you have an additional question?
No, I did not.
Okay.
I was just elaborating on the answer. What appears to be a notch on my property really isn't a notch because it goes all the way through, so it's more like a lightning bolt zig.
Interesting.
Commissioner Clausmith?
Actually, could you put the aerial image up and then?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how to get the slides back.
And then I'm gonna ask our media staff if there's some way to
Oh,
zoom
okay.
into the image.
This
There.
image? I got it, I'm sorry. Is that the image you want?
Yes. I don't have any questions at this time, thank you.
Commissioner Myers?
I only have questions for staff and not for the applicant. And I can ask those now? Okay.
Yes, as long as it's for the variances
Yes.
specifically.
Which are the governing regulations here? The zoning regulations or the Hyde Park standards? I guess this goes to the legal representation.
The zoning regulations would trump anything that the Hyde Park standards rely on the zoning's interpretation. This is an RM 24 zoning lot, so those setbacks would be established moving forward.
All right, thank you. And as we move, if we approve the variances for setbacks, can we add conditions? All right,
Maria Pettis-Mackel from the City Attorney's Office. Yes, you have, it is within your purview to add conditions if that's what you would, if that's what the commission decides to do.
thank you.
Commissioner Taylors?
You mentioned that the square footage that you have on your application here is in fact different now. Obviously something must have changed and/or you put the wrong one here. Do you have any documentation to show what that actual square footage is?
Yes, I can show a slide here of the floor plan.
Just something to give us the, can you tell us what those dimensions are? It's hard to.
Celeste, you have the dimensions?
If you do have the plans, if possible, could you place them on the overhead? And then let's see if maybe we could zoom in.
Okay, there's the first floor here, 22 by 26. We've got interior enclosed stairs there that account for that 4 feet. 22 by 24. And the third floor, 22 by 24 by 15, 15.6. Sorry, I don't do math in public well.
All right, now I have a couple, okay, so, a couple of questions for staff.
Yes,
He referenced several other carriage homes or outbuildings in the same vicinity of this particular property. Do we have any sort of documentation of when those accessory structures were constructed or?
I don't this evening, but the variance hardship goes what's unique and singular to the particular parcel. So whatever their hardship was, and if that was granted, I'm sure they provided substantial and competent evidence. This evening, you're looking at the parcel in question. I just wanted to put on the record as well that the side yard setbacks are correct. They could be at 3 foot from the side and 3 foot from the rear if the structure for the RM's 24 zoning classification is 750 square foot or less, because the total square footage with the numbers that he provided us just a little while ago, I have 1460. So anything above 750 square foot would lead you down to meet the primary structure setbacks, which are 7 on the side and 20 on the rear. And then for the height, within the city of Tampa, all accessory structures are held to 15 foot in height. Within the historic districts, if you ask for a design exception, you can increase that to 22.5 with discussion from land development and the preservation manager to stay consistent with the fabric within the Hyde Park Historic District. So I just wanted to clear up some of the numbers and what was required and what this classification calls for.
And with that said, that kind of leads me to my last question. Is there a reason you're asking for a variance rather than a zoning change?
I don't know if I would go back into a zoning change for my particular parcel to make it residential single. Is that your question?
Correct.
I guess I really didn't think of that. There's a varied history on the property itself. I guess I was predisposed to believing that I could give my best attempt to restore and rebuild what was historically relevant as primary consideration and zoning secondary. But zoning advantageously allows me to, to continue the 70-year precedent of separate dwelling structures as well. So there's some downside consideration there. But if the gentleman, finds it acceptable, I can answer your question that you posed to the staff of other structures in the area in that swath of RM24 zoning that don't comply to the 20-foot setback, and I'd like to walk through those dozen examples quickly if you like. I have the years built and the square footages.
So before we do that, do you have the information to say that which one of those examples are considered contributing to the district?
I've got dates. I don't have them exactly designated. Those would be estimates at this point, but I could easily check that as well. In fact, now that I think of it, I can look at the RM24 zoning map that I put out and, yes, correlate those to contributing because they're solid in color.
Okay. Any additional questions?
I don't have any.
No. Commissioner DeCubis?
I just wanted to ask kind of along the same lines as Commissioner Taylor. Did you consider any sort of a site plan with that 750 square feet, or did you go after a design exception to get you to at least that 22 and a half?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Did you consider any other options, either the 750 square foot, bringing it smaller, or for the height, the design exception, which would take you up to the 22 and a half feet?
I really disregarded the 750 square feet because that's a total volume that includes both parking as well as living space. If I went that route and put a standard 2-car garage in there, that's roughly 450 square feet. That leaves just almost a closet space of living space that is also without precedent in the area there. The unfortunate reality we have is that the property requirements are just larger than they were in yesteryear. We had, for example, ribbon driveways that were 2 feet of concrete, almost 3 feet of center, and 2 feet of concrete. The ribbon driveway today is 3 feet, 3 feet, 3 feet, and that just kind of, metaphor intended here, but that leads to the path of larger vehicles and larger garages to contain those larger vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
I built an accessory structure of 450 over 450 without any variances just 10 years ago. I thought I could do the exact same thing, especially when a historic structure existed on that same footprint, and do so without any controversy at all. So I'm really just shocked, frankly, that I'm kind of going through the procedure that to build the very carriage house I built 10 years ago, 450 over 450 with no variances, I shift 2 blocks south and I got to file for the same 3 variances that I'm applying for now. 2 setbacks and height. So I'm 24 feet in height. What I built on Marjorie Avenue on a contributing structure lot would be prohibited by the same criteria we're discussing here right now for DeSoto.
Well, I think it's
Okay.
important to note that even though something that was built in the district, regardless of if it was historic or not, the zoning guidelines were probably different for that structure, which requires different, things to be met. So I completely understand the idea that because a different structure and a different address within the district allowed it, every single location and every single property in this district is different because of that, because of the zoning, because of where it's located, the lot sizes. So although I completely understand and hear your frustrations with being able to do it at one property, that doesn't ultimately mean you're able to do it at a second property.
I understand, but to build that same carriage house on Marjorie, are you implying that I couldn't build that same property, that structure today with 3-foot setbacks and the height on the same
Yeah,
property?
that's not,
We can't make that determination, that's not in front of us today. And
Okay,
That's a completely
Okay.
different property.
okay.
So my last question was, you mentioned 24 feet, as far as height. Ours here says from 15 to 35.
That's for the zoning of RM 24. Accessory structure is capped, as I understand the code, at 35 feet, yes.
So you're asking for 35 or 24?
No, 24 was the Marjorie property.
Oh, okay, thank you.
so could you in maybe one sentence state, typically we'll see a hardship based off of irregular site of a property, trees and easement. What is the hardship on this piece of property that is causing you to need the setbacks and the height requirement?
Well, it's a unique, I walked through the 6 of them, I guess. The 6 you want me to elaborate on any of the 6 hardships or
No, and I guess
crystallize it into one sentence?
I guess my question is, zoning isn't typically considered a hardship. So the fact that a zoning of a piece of property is a
Yeah,
RM.
I cited zoning when we're talking the answers, but in the hardships that I wrote and read, I wasn't specifically citing zoning on Well, I guess I'm asking you to repeat the question here. I thought I was clear with answering 6 hardship questions.
Okay, to restate the question, typically, a hardship is not based off purely a rezoning. So based off of what we've seen, you could theoretically build in an accessory structure that meets zoning on this piece of property and work. Unfortunate part is you're asking for an accessory structure that is above those, which requires the zoning for the new residential multifamily to kick in. And the hard part is seeing that you are, in this case, kind of picking from residential single family and residential multifamily in order to say, I'm residential multifamily, so I would like this size of a space, but I want the residential single family setbacks because it allows me on that.
Actually, that's incorrect. If I can walk through the examples, I can show you setbacks less than 20 feet that are on residential multi-lots.
I personally don't need to walk through the setbacks unless another commissioner does. Other questions that I have, so the 1,500 square feet, I think the confusion on that is if you take based off of residential multifamily, it includes both the parking and the living. So when you do go through the plans and take the garage and both floors of the residential, it does get you about the 1,500 square feet. If you take out the parking, then that probably gets you closer to that 1,200 square feet. Unfortunately, because of the zoning, it counts all three. So you did mention a couple times that the historical precedent was a multi-story carriage house. Do you know how many stories that accessory structure had, or was it just a multi-story?
I can judge by the photo that it appears to be 2 stories.
Okay, so the statement of rebuilding the exact same carriage house in place from a 3-story to a 2-story would not be true.
No, when I said exact, I mean the exact same footprint that the carriage house would reside on.
Okay.
I'm in no way trying to tell anyone that the 2-story structure that we see on the historic photo is a total of 1,500 square feet parking and supposed living space.
Okay. Are there any additional questions from my fellow commissioners for the variances for either staff or the applicant?
And what is the size of the existing concrete pad?
I can pull that out. I'll pull the slide up. It's admittedly small.
Yes, so you're not actually replicating the previous footprint.
No, I never said I was replicating the previous footprint exactly. What I'm replicating is the location of the new carriage house over top the exact same footprint that footprint is right there.
And then,
It will be larger, yes.
yeah, so it's not the exact same footprint. Thank you.
Could you build a accessory structure on this property that meets the zoning guidelines, so the setbacks and the height on this property?
Are you saying that can I build 20 feet rear, 7 feet side setback? Conceivably, yes.
Okay.
Do I want to? No. Would I? No.
Okay. Are there any additional questions? Okay. At this point, the applicant is allowed 5 minutes for a rebuttal for the variance portion only.
If I could I go through some of the slides?
You have 5 minutes, sir.
Could I go through the slides with a?
Yes.
Okay, we talked about the hardships. These are the historic district precedent. This gets to the heart of the matter as to the judgment that was rendered against my application, that it doesn't comply with the Hyde Park design guidelines. I'll show that it does with these examples here. We talked about my Marjorie Hyde Park carriage house that I built 2 blocks over. That's that. This is the carriage house that is right next door. This is an original contributing structure. It's 930 square feet. It is set back 3 feet from the rear and less than 3 feet from the side. There's no problem with that. So that's consistent with what I'm looking to build, with the exception of the 3rd story. This is the property that is in a stone's throw from that carriage house that I just showed you. And we're walking, just to give you visual direction again, that alley of that entire RM24 zoned swath of property. This also is a contributing structure. This was built in 1923. This is 1,500 square feet, and it has a 0 lot line on the alley. This is a new structure that somehow got through the same kind of 3 variances that I'm entangled with now, built in 2018. 880 square feet. It looks like it's got less than a 3-foot rear setback, and is far greater than 15 feet in height. Further down, a couple doors down, you've got a whopping 1,610 total square feet of living space, greater than 15 feet, and again, less than a 3-foot rear setback. This was built in 2002. 2100 Albany, a mid-century concrete structure, 1,734 square feet, greater than 15 feet in height, and approximately a 3-foot setback from that air conditioning unit. This is a 3-story structure that has parking underneath, and this has 0 setback. This has got 2 garages here. This is kind of a quasi-Art Deco structure here that was built in 1989. And that one unit, condo unit alone, Unit C, has 3,030 square feet. This was built in 2002, clearly exceeding greater than 15 feet in height, and also has a 3-foot side and a 3-foot rear setback. This is a historic contributing apartment building. Since it faces Gunby, that's the front, the alley is the side. So that's less than a 7-foot side setback. That's a contributing, built in 1925. Total structure size, 8,000 square feet. 1902 Deco, a modern structure that looks old, built in 2008. 3 and 3 setbacks, side and rear, 996 total square feet, to include garage access with less than the required clearance that I would have filed on the Marjorie house. And then we got 2 townhouse complexes, one on Watrous and one on Rome. The one on Rome is the structures with the walk-ups clearly visible in the center lower part. The garages in the rear are less than 20-foot rear setback with dwelling spaces above and parking below. And the Rome townhouses with the photo to the right there have less than a 6-foot rear setback. Both of those are obviously greater than 15 feet. We didn't even get into the design consideration, but this is the design that I have in mind. And again, I was patient, I'm diligent. I want to do this the right way. This is designed specifically for a specific purpose, to mimic the historic photo that we have on record. So I purposely put the upper right drawing to correlate to the upper right inset red circle drawing of the historic structure. And this is the whole reason why I'm asking for 3 feet, because I want to mimic what was built there before and meet the designer intent. That's why you see 2 garage doors. You see 2 garage-like openings below. You see an arched upper kind of window area, and that's why I've got the arched upper window there. It's very difficult to do that with 2 stories. It conceivably can be done, but to meet the builder's intent or the appearance of the historic intent, I believe this is a pretty darn good attempt.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right, at this point, we will close the public hearing. The commissioners can now discuss the case. Would a commissioner like to begin?
As much as I'd like to agree that, and you know I'm a big proponent of the urban context and continuing it as much as possible with maintaining our alleys, I do agree that the setbacks for the immediate context does show consistency within that 3-foot rear setback, and that's one I could support. However, based on the fact that the property is zoned RM24, I find that difficult to support at this time. And I do think that there are certain components of what has been discussed and presented here for the record that does seem to be picking from a single-family residential zoning overlay and then picking from the RM24 in order to support certain elements that the owner would like to bring to the site. I do want to commend the owner for his desire to reconstruct in some way that historic presence for the accessory structure. It's very hard to not want to celebrate that for you, but zoning as it stands with the RM24, I find it difficult to support any of the requests here in front of us today.
I would agree with my fellow commissioner. I think it would be overreaching of us in our capacity as the board to support these setbacks the way it's zoned now. I don't really find that there's a hardship. You know, just because it's zoned this way does not meet the definition of a hardship. I also share your sentiments and your intent and your design. It's beautiful, and I hope something works out, but I can't support these setbacks right now, or the height.
Commissioner Sutton?
We have often seen accessory structures proposed in the Hyde Park District which tend towards meeting their zoning requirements for height and setback. Better? Thank you. What's complicating this project here is a little bit of oddity in terms of site geometry, but what's really driving this is the fact that this is more than just an accessory structure. This is an accessory dwelling. And once you throw in a full-blown dwelling into this, not accessory storage, not a garage, although we do have a garage component, not an incidental use, you really kick into a more stringent zoning requirement for setbacks. And the desire to put this back into a location where there used to be a garage, and before that, a full-blown carriage house, neither of which we have documentation for, really stretches the ability for us to judge whether or not this is an adequate replacement in place for the proposed use. You take any one of these two uses out or make this a smaller aggregate structure, then we'd be looking at an entirely different setback situation. But we don't have that here. This is basically a residential building, accessory to the main structure, that doesn't meet the zoning requirements for its common setbacks. This is notwithstanding, of course, the fact that there are a number of existing, and some of them even contributing, accessory buildings and accessory dwellings in the Hyde Park District which don't meet the current zoning ordinances they may have at their time or may have been unregulated at their time. We have no control over how these buildings may have been repurposed or altered over the very many years.
Commissioner Myers?
I concur with Mr. Sutton, and I think the two previous commissioners as well. It is unfortunate that there's been a great deal of effort put into this. And it's a good effort. But the result is a structure which is out of character due to its height, and which has zoning difficulties. And so there is perhaps a way to get this structure located in the same area. It may, but I am new to this board, and I do not know exactly what that may be. It seems as though it might be a zoning change, but I do not believe it meets the requirements for a variance.
And I have to agree with pretty much with everything I've heard from the other commissioners as well. I personally have an issue with the height. It doesn't seem to be in keeping with what's around it, as well as, we're trying to match a dwelling or structure from 1923, but that picture lends itself, as far as what I can see, that it's a two-story structure, not a three-story structure. From looking at the site plan, I feel like this structure could probably be moved to meet the requirements for the setbacks in this particular zoning. And unfortunately, I feel like it's, we're governed by the zoning that's currently on the piece of property, regardless of what it may not have been in the past on any of these other properties that were mentioned. So, with that said, I tend to have to agree with the other comments.
I would agree as well. I'm also having a bit of concern looking at your photo that you represented as figure 6, so the aerial image of 1923. If you look at some of the perspectives and kind of, zoom in a little bit and take some of the lines and stuff, the building that I think you were trying to replicate, I don't actually believe was on your property in that corner. It looks like it's actually behind the house next to you. And it makes me wonder, are we trying to replicate something that doesn't meet, on top of the variances and some of the discussions that we have that the other commissioners stated? I would tend to agree. I think there's been a really good thought process and kind of an idea of replicating what's there historically. But there's just been some inconsistencies of, square footage of the house, where it actually sits, replicating something that was historic. And unfortunately, I don't see a hardship that would entitle to the 3 variances. Are there any other discussions or any other things the commissioners would like to talk about before making a motion? Okay. Would a commissioner like to make a motion on the 3 variances, and just make sure if a motion is stated either for or against, just the explanation and reasoning is clear? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Should we explore the option of a continuance? We usually offer that.
Kamaria Pettis-Mackel from the city attorney's office. I don't think the applicant has given any indication about a continuance based on
Okay,
today. So again, you're just moving forward just on the variance.
just on the variance. I move that the variance requested for ARC 20-463 for the property located at 1314 South DeSoto Avenue for a variance, let's see here, of a rear yard setback from 20 to 3 feet with an encroachment of 9 inches for eaves and gutters, for a variance of the corner yard setback from 7 feet to 3 feet with an encroachment of 9 inches for eaves and gutters, as well as a variance for a height increase from 15 feet to 35 feet be denied due to the failure of the petitioner to meet the burden of proof with regard to the 6 hardship criteria set forth in section 27-114D of the City of Tampa Code of Ordinances, specifically that there was no actual hardship defined.
Do I have a second?
I will second that motion.
All right, and then if we could raise our hands, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Against? All right, motion passes.
Commissioner Dennis Fernandez, architecture review and instructor rating manager. We do have the need to continue the certificate of appropriateness, if that's the pleasure of the applicant, and in order to maintain his noticing integrity. So we'd be looking at moving that, I would say, till May the 3rd, because our agenda in April is currently filled.
I move for a continuation. I move to grant a continuance in case ARC 20-463 for the property located at 1314 South DeSoto Avenue in the Hyde Park Historic District to the May 3rd, 2021 public hearing at 6 p.m.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor, please raise your hands.
Aye.
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 Against? Motion passes. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.